Today, we are going to talk about how to value a development project. We will show how a development project must be evaluated when we take into account the different risks of each of its free cash flow components. Also, an overall discount rate, a unique discount rate for the development, will be estimated. As is the case with income properties, development projects also have cash flows of different characteristics. Basically, we have two types of cash flows. One cash flow corresponds to the finished property, the final property, is equivalent to the income property that we have at the end when the property is completely built. And the other cash flows correspond to the costs associated with the development. The present value of the development must be calculated by discounting each type of cash flow at its corresponding discount rate. As regards financing costs and the value of the land, we ignore them in the beginning. We will include these considerations later on. How do we discount the two types of cash flows? Let's start with the finished property cash flows, so the cash flows corresponding to the property once it is built. Well, as is logical, these finished property cash flows must be discounted at the corresponding steady state rate. That is, the steady state rate that we calculated in a previous video corresponding to, for instance, a commercial property. Development costs must be discounted at a rate close to the risk-free rate. Given that development costs are supposedly riskier than risk-free, we recommend using as a discount rate for the development cost the borrowing cost for developing the project. So the loan, the borrowing cost, or the cost of a loan that we would contract to develop the property. The resulting net present value then must be larger than land value for the project to be acceptable. So we have the present value of the final property cash flows. This is a positive cash flow. Then we have the present value of the development cost is a negative cash flow. The net present value, the difference between them, must be larger than the value of the land in order for the project to be acceptable. Let's illustrate with an example. Let's assume that we have a borrowing rate that we are going to use to discount developing costs of 8% yearly, and that is equivalent to a quarterly rate of 1.94% and a corresponding quarterly factor of 1.02. We are calculating the equivalent quarterly rates because we are going to do the projection in quarters, not years. And then we have also the steady income rate, meaning the steady state rate corresponding to the finished income property. And we are assuming that that rate is equal to 12%. And the corresponding quarterly rate will be 2.87%. Next, we have the cash flows and the corresponding quarters here. The outflows corresponding to development costs are in the first row, minus 600, minus 900, etc., up to the 8th quarter, in which we have the last negative cash flow of 300. And on the other hand, we have the property inflows corresponding to the inflows of the property once the property is sold. We are assuming that we sell it in two parts, two equal parts. The quarter number 9, we have an inflow of 7,000, and in quarter number 10, we have another 7,000. Next, we calculate the present values of each cash flow stream. The present value of the outflows is minus 5488.05, and the present value of the inflows is plus 10,697.41. So the final value is the sum of these two figures, which is a positive 5,208.36. As we said before, the value of the land must be less than this net present value for the project to be acceptable. Following, the internal rate of return corresponding to the obtained net present value will be calculated. So what we will find now is what is the internal rate of return of the development, taking into account the negative value or the positive value that we obtain, the net present value of the property at the beginning. So we find the internal rate of return of this cash flow. And well, we just calculated as 3.13% quarterly, which is equivalent to an implicit yearly discount rate of 13.13%. This internal rate of return is the implied discount rate for the development project. So that would be in theory the discount rate that we would use to discount the free cash flows of the project. It can be shown that the implied discount rate increases with the weight of development costs. So the more important are development costs as the total cost structure of the project, within the total cost structure of the project, the larger will be the implied discount rate. High relative development costs mean that the business is more in development than in the property itself, than in the land. So the less important the land and the most important development costs are, the more the value added by the developer and the higher must be the return, and vice versa. On the other hand, the lower the relative importance of development costs and the more important is the value of the land, the closer is the implied discount rate to the income property state implied rate. So there is kind of a continuum. Okay, the more important the value of the land, the closer the implied discount rate to the steady state rate. The less important the value of the land and the more important the weight of the development cost, the higher the discount rate will be. Now let's see how we incorporate the impact of financing costs. Well, the impact of financing costs comes through the tax shield that they generate. So the adjusted present value of the levered development will be equal to the net present value of the unlevered development, the one that we obtained before, plus the present value of the tax shield. And the present value of the tax shield can be calculated directly from the financing costs. The present value of the tax shield must be added to the net present value of the project only when the loan is contingent on the project, meaning that the loan takes place only if the project takes place, which is the usual case. The project is acceptable as long as adjusted present value is larger than the value of the land. So now we just complemented what we said before. Before we said that the value of the land had to be larger than the unlevered net present value of the project. When you have leverage, then you have to add to this net present value of the project the present value of the tax shield. And the project will be acceptable when the value of the land is larger, is smaller than the net present value of the project, including the present value of the tax shield. So what can we conclude on this presentation? We show how the development project must be evaluated when accounting for the different risks of each of these free cash flow components, in a similar way as we did it with the income properties. Also, an overall implied discount rate for the development was estimated, and we saw how this implied discount rate varies with the relative weight of development costs. The higher the weight of the development cost, the higher the implied discount rate. And finally, we incorporated the impact of the tax shield coming from financing costs into the valuation. And that's all we wanted to comment today. Thank you.